Hi, I'm Dr. Charles Glassman, aka CoachMD, and I have a question for you. What is your story? I mean, after all, everyone has a story, and I'd like to share with you a story of a doctor who I know. I was about 16 years ago, and this doctor was so stressed. This doctor was seeing 35 to 50 patients a day, and 2 consecutive Mondays in March of 2002. That was the crunch point. There was one day where he had seen, I think, his 50th patient, and he walked into the room, all set. Even though he was stressed, he'd always like to connect with his patients, and he'd say to his patients, "Thank you for your patience." Well, he tried to say that to this one patient, and she didn't want to hear any of it. She had just been waiting 2 hours. She had been waiting an hour in the waiting room, an hour in the exam room. She didn't want to hear any of these niceties. She went off on him for a good 10 minutes. And in that time period, he felt a pit in his stomach. And she left. He didn't even see her as for whatever she came in for. Well, that was one Monday. And when he drove home, he was nearly in tears. It was very upsetting. The next week, Monday, tended to be the busy day for doctors. Also, 35, 50 patients. In the middle of that, a woman comes into the waiting room and into in the office, goes up to the front desk and demands records from her husband, who they had seen, this doctor's office had seen 9 months before. And what was that about? Well, 9 months before, this woman's husband had seen the nurse practitioner in the office. And it turned out 3 days later, he ended up in the emergency room with a ruptured aortic aneurysm. And if anybody knows what a ruptured aortic aneurysm means, well, it really is sudden death almost. Well, fortunately enough, actually, this man survived. But this woman, anyway, was demanding those records. She was angry because in her mind and her husband, this should have never happened. Well, that was the breaking point for this doctor, because at that point, all he could think about, well, the next to come is going to be a lawsuit. So after the 50th patient, that stress, the week before, the day he drove home, he was in tears. Well, in case you haven't guessed it right now, that doctor was me. Okay? That doctor was me in 2002. And that was a point where I knew that something had to change. This was part of my story. Well, just coincidentally, and we say coincidences really are not coincidences, 3 days later I saw an article about some unique practices that were developing. These practices were called concierge practices. And that meant that people would pay an extra fee so their doctors could be their personal doctor. And it sounded very interesting to me. It sounded exciting to me. But it also sounded very risky. But 10 months later, I was the 10th doctor in the United States to open up such a practice. Well, this is not something that is for the faint of heart. Doing so comes with a lot of risk. And we had 4 children under the age of 9. We had just moved into a home. We had a lot of financial burdens and a lot of responsibilities. Well, this was a calculated risk, and it took a lot of courage. So when I say, what is your story? Well, this is part of my story. But how did I get there? Well, all of our stories start somewhere, and they start in childhood. Now, you may think that I got this courage and this ability to take a risk because I had an incredible childhood that was, I could tell you, a rags to riches story, where I came from the depths of poverty and worked my way up to being a successful doctor, or that I was in an abusive home and I became a criminal or a drug addict, and I spent years in rehab, or I got out of prison. No, actually, that wasn't my story. But my story was probably a lot like your story. It was, it was a childhood. It was a childhood with its ups and its downs and its dysfunction. But if I had one word to describe how I was as a child, it was insecure. I didn't feel as though I was smart enough. I had this idea that somehow when I was going to be a big boy, when I was going to grow up, I was going to be a doctor. But I never felt smart enough. And when I was in third grade, I don't know how many of you grew up in the 60s, but we had a program called SRA. And the SRA was a reading program, and it was separated you into groups. And so these groups, for the depending on how proficient you were in reading. Well, I was alone in my group. And I looked around. There was nobody. I was me. And it was the lowest group. I was in the remedial reading group. So that did a lot to boost my confidence, right? Okay. So then I recall one day, I was with some friends. I think I was 10 years old, and we were walking on a golf course to go fishing. And we get to the pond on the golf course, and all of a sudden in the background we hear, "Hey, you guys can't fish there. That water has chemicals in it." And my friend, 10 years old, retorts back, "The only chemical in this water is H2O." And I thought, man, what a witty thing for this guy to say. How smart. Why can't I be that smart, right? So then I recall, as I said, in the 60s, there was the talk now, not many people talked about cholesterol. And I started eating this hamburger with a friend of mine. And he said, you're eating that? That's loaded with cholesterol. And I was thinking, cholesterol? I didn't even know what that was. Shouldn't I know what cholesterol is? I mean, after all, even though I'm 10 years old, I want to be a doctor. Shouldn't I know that stuff? So I had this insecurity, this thing that just, what? So how does that translate into how did I get a part of my story now where I have to utilize all this courage and take these risks? Well, I almost didn't get there. If I listened to certain voices, my high school advisor, he told me when he's asking me what I want to do with my life, and I told him I had this, this goal, this dream of becoming a doctor. And he looked at my transcript and said, "Well, you have okay grades, but becoming a doctor is really hard. It takes a lot of effort. Did you ever think of maybe having a plan B?" Well, when he said that, that did something in me, that there was no way that I was going to fail. Whatever that was, there was no way in me that was going to make me fail. So I ask, what is your story? What is holding you back? Well, what did I do? What was the transition that allowed me to go from there to where I am, and to be where I was 16 years ago, to take such a calculated risk? Well, the first step is realizing that all of our stories start in childhood. But the interesting thing about our brain during childhood is it is accumulating all this information. It's accumulating all this information. What is this information going to do for us? This information is to try to keep us safe. It's trying to protect us. But all it's doing, it is coming in. It's our primal nature. It's our base nature. It is accumulating all those circumstances that may appear when we're an adult that might cause us danger, threats, or vulnerabilities. And it only causes us to do two things: fight or flee it. So whenever we're faced as an adult with these possible dangers, threats, or vulnerabilities, this child brain clicks in if we're not aware of it. So that is why it's important to recognize that all our stories start there in childhood. And that's the first recognition. It starts with that brain. So when we look at our lives and we think it and say, well, what is it? What is sabotaging us? Why can't I move ahead? Why can't I? Why do I get going sometimes, and the wind kind of gets pulled out of my sails, and I lose faith. I lose faith in humanity. I lose faith in God, let's say. I lose faith in myself. And what is it? Well, that what is has to do with that childhood. So, I look back at that and I say, well, these are things that were part of our story, and those are things that we can't rewrite. They are fixed firmly. So all those stories that I had, all those insecurities that I had as a child are fixed firmly. And unless I recognize that they are somewhere there in my brain, there's no way to move beyond it. So in my career, in my personal and professional lives, I've realized that there are certain aspects, certain keys to what we can do and to what I've done that has allowed me to understand this concept and has allowed me to propel, to give me the courage and the ability to take calculated risks. And so when I say calculated risk, because in order to get the what I call the holistic success would be financial security, would be vibrant health, would be strong relationships. That's holistic success. And in order for us to get that holistic success, what we need to do is first recognize that we are held back by certain constraints that were there since our childhood, but there are certain actions that we must take in order to move beyond. And the first piece that I like to talk about is passion. Well, that's the second one. The first one is purpose, actually. So when we think of purpose, we often think about, okay, what's, am I going to volunteer in a homeless shelter, which is a good thing. Sure, it's a great thing, actually. But is it volunteering my life to mission work in Africa? Also, a very commendable and very a very good thing, let's say. Can't argue with it, a very nice thing. But in order, however, to make purpose propel you to be able to break through the insecurities, the most important part of purpose is understanding, appreciating, and accepting your gifts, your talents, your strengths, your God-given abilities, those abilities that you've been born with. Everyone has them. You have them. I have them. Well, they're different for everybody. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a professional baseball player, maybe football player, right? Look at me. Okay, I mean, I'm in decent shape, maybe, but professional player, I don't think so. That wasn't part of my gifts, my talents. So it's understanding and accepting your gifts, your talents, your strengths. By doing that and appreciating those, then you can go through and you can act with purpose. So we look at like entertainers or comedians, and I've talked with many of them, and they really are sad. They're miserable. And it's what gets me is that it's because they're not recognizing their true talent. They don't understand that they're actually physicians. Comedians are physicians. They're healing people. They're boosting their immune system. Laughter and comedy boosts our immune system. So what I've said to them is, when I've talked with them, is that take your gift and understand it and recognize what you're doing. So don't just do it because you want to make money doing it. Go through it and go to it and allow yourself to understand what you're really doing. And there's a very great story about purpose that I love, and it's about this man, this Canadian, very wealthy Canadian, who was an Orthodox Jewish man, and he died, and he left his sons 2 wills. And the first will, they went to the estate, whatever, and they opened up the first will, and the first will said, "I want to be buried with my socks on." And so they honored this will. They brought it to the head rabbis, and the head rabbi said, "No, in our religion, you're buried without any clothes. You're just in a shroud. You're just covered with a shroud, no clothes." So they didn't do it. They didn't abide by it. 30 days went, the period of mourning, 30 days, when they're going to open up the second will, read the second will. In the second will, it said, well, it divvied up the wealth of this man, and he said, "I want you to," the will read was that, "Can't you see now? You could have all the wealth in the world, but you can't be buried even with your socks on." Meaning you can't take your wealth with you. You can't take your gifts, your talents, your skills, your God-given abilities with you. You have to act on them and share them while you're alive. And that's acting with purpose. That is one step. The next is passion. How do we act with passion? Well, we think of passion, with fire and brimstone, loud noises, loud speech. No, passion is waking up every day and understanding that there's gratitude. that you have gratitude. You have gratitude that you're appreciative. You go to bed, you wake up with gratitude. And that molds your passion. The second is understanding and realizing, recognizing the daily magic that happens in your life. The daily coincidences. The coincidences that just happen and that bring you to another place. So with purpose and passion. And the next is perseverance. When we persevere, that is how we get things done. That's how we get past our insecurity of childhood, propel us to take risks and to act with courage. Long-term gain, short-term gain often leads to long-term pain, and that's procrastination. Well, perseverance is short-term pain leading to long-term gain. There's a story I love to tell about this boy. He was in karate, and he goes to his sensei, and he says, "Sensei, I want to be a black belt." And the sensei says, well, he asks, how long is it going to take? The sensei says, well, it's going to take 10 years. And the boy's only 10 years old. Well, that's my lifetime. What if I study karate all the time, and all I do is karate? How long is it going to take, Sensei? Sensei says, 20 years, my son. 20 years? I can't. What if I move in here and I do whatever you tell me to do? How long is it going to take? He says, 20 years. 20 years? But what if I just breathe, live, I do everything, and I dedicate my whole life and everything to karate? How long then? 30 years. And so the sensei, the boy says, in perplexed, I don't understand. And the sensei says, well, if you have one eye on your goal, you have only one eye on the path in which to find the way. And see, that's what happens when we set our goals so high, and whether we want to lose 100 pounds, or whether we want to make $100 million, let's say, or we want to do whatever. When we set our goals so high, they're so daunting, we get blinded by them. And that's why, in order to act and to get over those insecurities, to rewrite your story, it's important to make short-term goals. Short-term goals will get you there. So I'm excited when you take the purpose, the passion, and you persevere. I'm so excited to read your stories, your new stories, as you write them, as you move beyond the stories that are engraved in the past that you can't do anything about, that are in there. You can't do anything about them. I am so excited for when you can share with me your stories, your new stories. So thanks a lot for the time and for coming out today. All right.